This is Basket Case Clubs, CPR Group's podcast where we turn basket case clubs into showcase clubs. Hello everyone and welcome back to Basket Case Clubs. My name's Michael Connolly and it is my pleasure to be your guide on this journey of basket casey goodness. Joining me as usual is my brother and partner in basket casey goodness, Steve Connolly. Good afternoon, Steve.
Good afternoon, Michael. I wonder how good a job people can do of telling the difference between our voices when they're listening, or if we just blend into one. They say, wait, who's this now? Is this Michael? Is this Steve? It's probably, all the really witty comments. They think, this must be Steve.
I was going to say, we should just do it like when you are at a public meeting and you got to introduce, hi, this is Michael. My question's in two parts. Who's talking about that?
Oh, hey, it's also just come to mind that one of us could record an episode and just pretend that it's both of us.
Oh, that's gold. Yeah, it'd be probably more work because I'd have to talk over you all the time, which means double tracking and then go, I didn't talk over me enough. I've got to talk over me more.
And God, I've missed you. I tell you, it's been too long between drinks.
I was just waiting for you to say it's been too long between drinks because we shouldn't mention that this is one of those rare occasions, you can probably tell by the audio, that we're actually in our boardroom together, sitting in the same room. And we are almost at the end of our series on planning. So we only have a couple to go, but there's some interesting things to get to that we haven't actually talked about yet. And one of them is this thing about goal setting. So that's what I'd really like to talk to you about today, Steve. And what makes goals good and why do we do it? So there's a statistic that you might be interested in, and I can see that you're looking at the same.
I love statistics.
Same speaking notes that I'm looking at. So I'm going to tell you this statistic. Did you know?
And I'm going to be completely surprised by whatever it is that you might be about to say.
Did you know that 17.8% of all statistics are made up on the spot? I had to do that.
Wait, where are you reading from?
I had to do that because it actually says this statistic here. Apparently, writing your goals down makes you 42% more likely to achieve them. And I've always found this fascinating because, isn't that just a little bit subjective? And based on what measure and how big was the sample size? And then my nerdy brain takes over and I just start to go into a bit of catatonia and go, now my eyes have gone crooked. I can't think anymore. But I gave it some thought particularly in the context of club planning. And there's a few reasons why it's important. But where I want to get to is that we've talked a lot about setting lofty goals. And then I think we then talked about taking reasonable steps towards achieving those goals. So, and that those two can kind of seem in conflict with one another. But because, you set a lofty goal and you say, well, let's talk about growth in membership. I want to grow to 1,200 members. Mm-hmm. Okay, fine, grow to your 1,200 members. But how does that help me today? And what do I actually need to do today? And that's why the lofty goals can sometimes not create enough of a clear vision of what we've got to do to achieve that. And so that's why it's important to bring it back to some day-to-day steps that you can apply.
Yep.
But really, the reason that setting goals does genuinely make them more likely to be achieved, and that 42%, I think I have that on good basis coming from somewhere. I forget the studies that have done it, but they've been replicated. And it's because, I know I used the word vision just now, and that's why. It's because if you can actually see something, you know that you're moving towards it. And as humans, we're driven by things that we can see. So go back, I don't know how many thousand years, let's say 70,000 years, when the first Australians were wandering around, and the first Australians were hunter-gatherers. And so, and obviously living in groups, the more that you work together, I read somewhere the other day, in the old days when you killed something, so say they killed a nice big tasty kangaroo, there were no refrigerators around 70,000 years ago. So you kill a kangaroo and you all get to eat. Okay, that's fantastic. We get to eat. But
for the first few days, the meat's safe.
Yeah, but then that's it. So we can't store it beyond the first few days. So what do we do with it? The best bet is to feed it to your friends. Because if you feed it to your friends, then the concept of reciprocity means they're going to feed you back when they kill a kangaroo and you haven't. Yep. So I forget where I read this, but it was like your refrigerator 70,000 years ago was the but the bellies of your buddies. So fill your buddies' bellies up, and then they'll fill yours up when they catch something and you don't. So I thought that was good. But you imagine that you can see, you're looking over the just along over the next ridge, and you see something to eat. You go, oh, something to eat. You know that's good. What that does is your eyes send signals to your brain. Your brain goes, oh, your brain releases dopamine. Now, dopamine's that wonderful chemical that you get it hit off so you're a finisher completer. So I know that Steve I've seen him do this.
A tendency to write things on my to-do list just to cross them off.
Yes.
What did you call me? A completer?
Finisher completer.
Finisher
So yes,
completer.
this worked in the old days when Steve had a paper-based list, and he used to draw little red boxes next to the writing that he'd written and put a blue tick and a red. I'm remembering that right? With they red boxes and then blue. Yep. But he just still does it on his phone. So now he sets up a reminders list and ticks things off so that he can watch them go zoop down to the bottom or disappear. So yeah, we do that. So that's dopamine, and it's a nice chemical. It makes us feel good, and it makes us then, because it's a nice chemical and it makes us feel good, our brain then says, hey, repeat that behavior. So we see the thing that we want to eat and say it's not going to move for the sake of a good story, because kangaroos can move pretty fast. So let's call it a tree with some nice fruit on it. And you see that like over a long way away. Anyway, you start walking towards it and you go down into the valley and you can't see it anymore, and you come up and up and up, and then you see it off in the distance again. Boom, you get another hit of dopamine. And the reason that this hit is there is to say you've moved in the right direction. You should keep going in that direction. You go, oh, that felt good. We achieved something, because you can look behind you and see that you've actually made headway. So you move again and you go down, you lose sight of the tree, you come up again. There it is, it's even closer. Boom, you get another hit. And you get closer and closer and closer until you actually get the fruit, and you're eating the fruit. And what does that do? Dopamine galore. This is fantastic, because your brain sends signals to your body saying eating is good, eating gives me energy, energy allows me to go and, what is it that you've got to do?
Chase down kangaroos.
Chase down kangaroos.
Procreate.
Fend off people who want to eat you, feed people or... in this case, other animals that might want to eat you. Yeah, so the survival thing. So then it encourages that sort of behavior. So by writing down goals, especially when you can see that you're taking progress towards them, it still releases dopamine. So the lofty goals need to have some measurable components to them, which is really important to have those so that you can see when you are making progress, or at least moving in the right direction. And it's actually dopamine that does that, which is the same shit that gets released that makes you get really excited when you get a text message.
Yeah. Well, us humans are silly, aren't we? I think also, even on a really easy to comprehend level, writing your goals down or documenting them in your strategic plan and putting that plan or some excerpt from it. You know, we do our visual strategic planning posters, and I was once, and I'm sure that I've talked about this on the podcast, I was once in the line at a local gymnastics club that we had prepared a strategic plan with, and the then vice president was serving behind the canteen, and I just, you know, somewhat offhandedly asked about the visual strategic planning poster that was there beneath the menu for the canteen. And the vice president said, oh, you know, I reckon that we're the only gymnastics club in the Southern Hemisphere where every member has read our strategic plan. And I chuckled and said, oh, well, yes, we actually prepared that plan. So it's glad. Thanks for the good feedback. But he also made the comment that plan being front and center for members who are lining up to buy a coffee from the cafe or the canteen would see goals documented in that poster and would then say, hey, that goal relates to sponsorship, better sponsorship outcomes. And I've got experience in sponsorship, so how can I help? So I think that front and center, the idea of having your goals front and center also brings with it a degree of accountability, because as a committee or as an organization, you're saying we commonly agree that these goals are our goals and that we're working towards those over the next 12 months, 3 years, whatever. But it's also saying here's a degree of stick-to-itiveness that we're committing to by writing them down and having them written in front of us. We can't ignore them. We can't forget about them. They can't drop off the bottom. And often we find that when we follow a strategic planning process, all that we're doing is documenting the ideas that people have already got and that people are already discussing during management committee meetings, rather. And those ideas being documented in an ad hoc manner in minutes, other than being reviewed at the start of the next meeting to be accepted as a true and accurate record of the proceedings, they get forgotten about because the day-to-day urgent shit takes precedence. So documenting the shared, common, agreed goals, first and foremost, means you don't forget them.
Yep.
And then, like I say, I think brings with it accountability, because you say, we're sharing with everyone internally, members, externally, external stakeholders, customers, and the like, that we are aiming to achieve these things, and it's up to us collectively to make sure that that happens.
Yeah, and I like that collective, the collective thinking, because what a goal does is it says that's the direction this bus is going. And what's really interesting is that I've been involved in plans that finally said this is what we're trying to achieve, and so therefore that's the direction we're heading. And some people looking up at it and saying, I didn't think we were going there. Mm-hmm. And this level of a lack of clarity comes out, and people, well, but I don't necessarily want to go there. And we've had people get off the bus that were not on the bus for the right reason. So these are obviously, I'm talking about casual staff and paid staff in this case, who weren't keen on whatever, for whatever reason that was, but they got off the bus.
Didn't the same happen with a committee member or two, though, in that same organisation? Maybe I'm thinking of a different organisation, but there was that kind of realisation during the strategic planning process, oh, I actually am not on the same page as all of you, so either all of you or me, we're going to have to get off the bus.
Who was it that said, in every room, there's a dickhead?
Me. And if you look around that room and you can't work out who the dickhead is, it's a very good chance it's you.
Yeah, funny that. So, it's just,
sorry, a wise man once said.
Very wise man. Yeah. But it's funny how the nature of our work often puts us in the position to find those people.
Yep.
We just happen to be there when it's time to say, well, this is actually, and look,
no one's holding a gun to your head. You can get off that bus if you don't share the vision.
Yeah, and look, okay, so that could even be controversial itself, couldn't it? Because people say, well, hang on a minute, doesn't that usurp the democratic process? But I think that that's the very definition of the democratic process, because if we collectively, by majority, say that's the direction we're going, then you have two choices. You can either stay on the bus and fall in line with that direction, which is perfectly fine, because if the majority says, yes, that's the direction we're going, or get off the bus. If you get off the bus, but you still feel so strong, and I get asked this a lot, and it's a bit of a tangent, but if you still feel so strongly about that organisation that you don't want to leave it, then fine, but you've got to act in solidarity with the rest of the committee or the board, because there's none of this, they voted for it, but I was against it the whole way, because that's undermining and white-anting. And if genuinely you're of the opinion that the board is full of baddies, then there is a process for removing the baddies. And it's
speaking of democratic processes, yes.
Yeah, and who's that up to? The members. We are in community sport, it's member-driven, so it's up to our members to drive those decisions. They're never fun and they're never popular, but there's a process for doing it, and that's how our incorporated associations and other not-for-profit structures exist, for the members to make those big decisions so that our leaders are actually leading in the direction we want to go. So, I think it's a different organisation, the one I was mentioning, the one you're thinking about, but that's what happens in those cases that you're taking away the ability to have an argument about a misinterpretation between two or more people of our strategic direction, or our very specific targets that we want to achieve. So this is really clear to, when we started this series, we talked about be clear on what type of organisation you are. This is now kind of getting into a bit more of that same idea, but broken down into certain areas.
I think also in the context of the discussion that we're having now, that if that coordinated, very deliberate strategic planning process identifies inconsistencies amongst points of view of decision makers, particularly focusing on the board or committee, putting staff to the side for a moment, that process uncovering those differences in opinion, I would assume in many cases is going to lead to a better long-term outcome for that organization than not addressing it directly through a process like that and it rearing its head gradually over time through disagreements. And you and I are on the same committee, and just because you vote for something, I begin to vote against it. Just that sort of behavior that we see creep in, because we're people and you put a group of us together and some of us aren't going to get along well. Some of us are going to have differences in opinions.
And self-interest eventually takes over our interest in the common good.
So often, yep. So I think it's just an important point that don't avoid that conflict, don't avoid that uncovering of the differences in opinions, but instead identify it through a deliberate planning process and allow people to have the confidence to say, well, I don't agree with that, so I'm going to remove myself from that decision-making process,
or be involved in setting the goal in the first place.
Even better,
and saying, well, actually,
having your input.
Why don't I agree with it? Am I not agreeing it in quantum? Am I not agreeing with it in quality? So let's take it. It's a growth target. Do I think that, what did I say? 1,200. Do I think 1,200 is too many? Do I think the 1,200 is too few? Is it linked to having a lack of clarity on what sort of organisation we are in the first place? Because then that might say, I don't think 1,200 is the right number because I think that we should have fewer members at a high, then become an elite sort of club. Fine, but as by setting the goals, it gives you an opportunity to open up that bigger discussion as well, which is the purpose of planning. The purpose of planning,
absolutely,
funnily enough, is not just to have a plan that's going to get finished and sit in a freaking drawer somewhere and never get used. So I got another question for you then. In a good plan, how many goals do you reckon there should be?
There are so many variables that I probably can't give you a number, particularly if it's the first time that an organisation has been through a coordinated strategic planning goal identification process.
You made it sound sexy then, didn't you?
Yeah.
Strategic planning goal identification process.
Yes.
Yes, let me give up
where
a
I
Saturday.
really shine. Yeah. But err on the side of less rather than more. If you're an organisation that's never done this stuff before, I'm changing my language to like that. If you ain't never done this stuff before, keep it simple. Having one goal and achieving it, I think, would be far greater an outcome than having a shitload of goals and trying to spread your attention too thinly and achieving none of them well. It depends so much on the organisation.
Yes, it depends on the organisation, but it also depends on the time frame. Because if you're talking an operational plan, then is goals the right thing? Because we're really operationalising the goals that should already exist.
Yes.
So those are that's then more the steps involved in planning. But I think it's more about, so if we're talking a 3-year or 5-year time horizon, and how many things are really important. So here's something to think about. You've got to be able to remember the important things. And I don't know how many ingredients go into an Anzac cookie.
A handful.
So
less than 5 is
let's work at this together, Steve. I don't know where I'm going with this analogy yet, but let's keep it going. So what have we got? Oats, golden syrup. The most important thing, I think, is butter. There's probably self-raising flour in them because they tend to go up. We've got the sugar. Do you put brown sugar as well? Oh, and I think egg, a binding agent, so egg or egg yolk. So that's 5 ingredients.
There you go, a handful.
So did you just Google it?
Maybe.
All right, so how did I go in the test? Hang on, for Jess's benefit, so she doesn't have to rewind, I think.
Taste.com.au.
It's obviously going to be right then, because it's got AU on the end and we're talking Anzac
There's
cookie.
8
it's going
ingredients.
to, but it's going to say use plain flour and baking soda. So I'm going to get a conceded pass for that. I'm going to claim a conceded pass for that one.
Plain flour.
So, yes.
Uncle Toby's traditional rolled oats.
Hang on.
No product placement here.
We're going to have to, and where are we going to buy them? Coles or Woolies? Depending on who's sponsored.
Only at Coles. 150 grams of Coles organic unsalted butter. Only at Coles. Funny that. Yeah. Okay, so taste.com.au says 8 ingredients: plain flour, rolled oats, caster sugar, desiccated coconut, unsalted butter, golden syrup or treacle, water, and bicarb soda.
Yeah. And you know what? I reckon.
So you can have your conceded pass for.
Okay, so let's say that I mix up and I don't know, and I just do it until it looks good and until the cookie dough tastes good enough. So it's got eggs, and I'd put just maybe one or two, and you probably don't need eggs in cookies. I don't remember my home ec. And then self-raising flour, so it's already going to rise. Oats, golden syrup, and did I say plain flour, egg,
Sugar, butter.
Butter. Did I forget butter? I think I forgot butter, the most important thing. So yeah, golden syrup. So I would possibly put, depends on how much golden syrup you put in, but you could also put brown sugar in as well. I use brown sugar instead of cast. Anyway, I'm sure that we're going to have, but anyone listening to this podcast while driving is going to be thinking, I need to go home and make Anzac cookies. I'm really hungry.
But I'm not going to let those guys do it for me.
If I put all of those into a bowl and mixed it up and slapped it in cookie-shaped things on a tray and stuck it in the oven, what would happen?
Well, I hope that you have golden, tasty Anzac biscuits.
They'd be good
spat out
enough
at
that
the
there'd
end.
be none left in 2 days. I guarantee it.
You might not even need to put it in the oven if you're my kids.
it would absolutely all go. So that's near enough. Now, if I was to think of a more complicated recipe that I've got to go and refer back to the recipe, so thank you for ruining my little analogy here by going and looking up a recipe, but I was close enough. I remembered enough of them.
You've got oats.
Because there were
that's what really matters in Anzac.
Oh, and that had coconut in it, so I think that might be a
it's a
stylistic
bastardized.
So take that out. There's one. The bicarb, and I said baking soda. They said bicarb and water. Why would you put water in it? Seriously, what funny? Just put more butter in it. So take all of them out, and it's still going to work. It's still going to make good enough Anzac cookies that they taste like Anzac cookies, which means you're achieving the end result. And by the way, anyone who's eaten an Anzac cookie that's made with what I just said is going to have a smile on their face and a full tummy.
And they're going to say they're eating an Anzac cookie.
There you go. Okay, so that was clear because there was 5. Now, I'm not saying you've got to have 5, but ask me tomorrow and I'll remember those 5. But I don't reckon I'll remember it now because I'm talking about it. But I wouldn't remember water.
And nor coconut, maybe,
and definitely not caster sugar. So we're getting into detail here. So the thing about goal setting is they should be simple and they should be memorable. So because if they're simple, like a good mission statement, if it's simple and it's memorable, people are going to remember that that's the direction we're heading. And how concrete do we want to make it? 1,200 members by the beginning of the 25 season. Boom. Yeah. Like that's concrete. Now, what have we got to do to get to 1,200 members if we're only at 600? Can we be the same sort of club? No, that's going to drive so long as you've got people who are all on the bus together and happy to go in that direction and driven because, we actually believe that we've got more to give. We're not just, we've got latent capacity. We've got fields that we could use better. We've got people that we could, people that have more to give and are prepared to give it. So let's capitalize on that because then we're going to double the number of people that we're making happy by being able to participate in our sport. AKA eat our yummy Anzac cookies.
I think also when you were talking through your 5 ingredients, what struck me was that if you're going through a goal setting process in the broader process of strategic club or business planning, think broadly about your business units as an organization or the operational areas within your club or association. So often we've talked about the fact that people will come to us and say, hey, we need a strategic plan because we want grants or because we want to do some facility
to get a lease.
That's right. So whatever the motivator for your strategic planning process, whatever the catalyst, think a little more. We strongly advocate for thinking a little more broadly than that and allowing yourself to challenge the status quo across all areas of your club. So what that probably means is that, and we'll often operate with pillars, so strategic planning pillars, and that might be money or it might be people or it might be facilities, for example. But so I think to reflect on my answer before, keep it simple, have as few goals as possible. I think that with the benefit of hindsight, if I may, Your Honour, I would like to expand that and say aim to set goals across more than just one area of operation within your organisation.
But you might only have one in each.
You might only have one in each.
If it's the right goal and it's inspiring the right behaviour, then the achievements you're going to make on one are actually going to be really broad because you think, so what would And let's continue with this hypothetical analogy. We got 600, we want to go to 1200. That's double. Okay, great. But that says so much about the structure, about the people, about our funding model, maybe even around our very business model. What are our other funding streams or other revenue streams? To go back to when we were talking marketing in the canteen, how are we maximizing the return from what we can get from our customers, the engagement we can get from our customers? And I know that's taking a step away from sport, and I can hear some people go, well, Michael, hang on a minute, but community sport, it shouldn't be about milking your customers for all they're worth. And how did that go for Ray Kroc? It's like I see golden arches in a lot of places. So there's a lot of merit in thinking broadly, but absolutely, what's our core business? Our core business is sport. So that's why we do what we do. Mm-hmm. But there's plenty that we can do around that mean we can do that better. And then, then there's the other side saying, well, if we've got, you mentioned finance as a pillar. Mm-hmm. If money is a pillar, Steve, how is that connecting with our community purpose? And you say it yourself, we don't exist to make money, and money's not our driver. So why do you say that it's so important?
Because money enables you to do all the important stuff.
It's the fuel in the tank, man. It's what drives your ability. Yeah, okay, we're not for profit, but guess what? If we don't make profit, we're not going to be able to do anything different. Our budget can't change from year to year to add all of these other things. So moving from 600 to 1200 is going to take massive process improvements. Are our systems going to support that? The very way that we manage our invoicing, like if we're still doing that, because 600 at a pinch might be manageable to do that sort of stuff manually, double it and you'll drive people bananas. And that's not a job a volunteer is going to want. So then, well, hang on a minute. If it's not a job a volunteer is going to want, then how do we make sure that we've got capacity to pay somebody to do this sort of work? And, we can't possibly pay somebody, because if we're going to pay someone, then we're going to have to get them to get sponsorship as well to cover the cost of their own position. Well, that's setting a KPI for them that says get more sponsors. And guess what? Getting more sponsors isn't fixing your processes, is it? So what do you need them to do? And then whose job is it to make sure we're funding that? And what are we missing in our pricing structure? Oh, look, just go and listen to the list of Basket Case Club's episodes above and you'll get all of the answers that you need.
Hey, we should just say that each episode. So we were going to talk about this, but just go back and listen to all the previous episodes. We're going to sit here and drink whiskey.
Yeah, probably not totes approach. Well, that was fun. I've really enjoyed talking about this. We had quite a shorter list of things to talk about than we talked about.
What a surprise. we talked longer than anticipated.
Is that why Christmas in the Connolly household usually goes for weeks? Because we've all got to have our say. Oh, thank you, Steve. It's been lovely talking to you.
Thank you for having me in your boardroom with whiskey and pretzels.
You're very welcome. Did the pretzels make you thirsty?
Yes, they did. Lucky we had whiskey.
Very lucky. Thank you, of course, to Jess, our wonderful producer and editor, who makes us sound better than we do, which is hard, because we sound so wonderful anyway. If you're not already subscribed to our newsletter, make sure you do that. We've got a pretty good frequency of issues of our newsletter that go out that, of course, include links back to episodes that you may have missed. Follow us on social media if you haven't already done so, where you'll get some useful information there, as well as finding out about some really cool projects that we have on the go. Steve, as always, it's been a pleasure, and I look forward to talking to you again next time.
The pleasure was all mine. Adios.
Well, I'll let the pleasure be yours. So yes, because it was shit for me. Thanks for talking to me. Ciao.
See ya.
Basket Case Clubs acknowledges the traditional custodians of the country on which we record, being Yugambeh, Turrbal, Jagera and Kabi Kabi land. We recognise their enduring connection to land, waters and culture, and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to First Nations listeners.